Well, there's been a tremendous amount covered today, and as chair of the Cockburn, I really thank everybody who's contributed, including the many people who put stuff in on chat, which I think has been difficult to capture it all in the time available. Many profound contributions there as well. So I guess it's down to this final session to try and pull it into some sort of shape and try to perhaps scope a way forward for Edinburgh, but perhaps also for ourselves as an organisation. And I wonder if I could just start it off. I struck that Maureen was just saying there that, in terms of building relationship between the city council and communities, there's no quick fix. And given what we've been talking about through the day, I would kind of maybe ask to start off with whether people think there has to be a quick fix. Can we actually deliver, notwithstanding a lot of positive things that are happening, but can we scale those up and make the kind of transformation that's necessary in the next decade? Or do we need to accept that there are constraints, that institutions move slowly? There's some resistance to some of the ideas. So can we look for a quick fix, or is that impossible?
Personally, I think that's absurd, and in its purest form, extremely impossible to do. One of the things that I tried to talk about briefly in chairing our session was that I personally feel a gulf between what I'm able to do or expected to do as an individual, much of which comes under individual responsibility anyway for our property or whatever, and the broadness of perhaps policy, and those which are trying to interject to get in amongst policy and help us understand. I mean, I used an example, these great guys called resilience brokers who are, as far as I can see, being a novice and a non-technical at this, in between us and policy and trying to drive it forward. It's all about resilient places and communities. And I quoted it because only to illustrate my own ignorance, in fact, and their remit is connecting global and local expertise, effective solutions and unlocking value to deliver systemic climate resilient solutions to context sensitive challenges. Now, I have to take my time with that, and it indicates, I think, only the complexity of the issue, not that they're out there doing something I don't understand or shouldn't be done, and quite the opposite. They're obviously facilitating something that's absolutely desperately needed, but as an individual, it's hard for me to make that step, to take the time to understand that. Yes, I can fix my gutter, but this is a big jump.
I'd like to say that I don't think the aspect of quick fixes or something, something that can be done now and fix everything for 6 months' time, that I think is completely divorced from what sustainability and climate change is. Climate change has happened because over a series of years, decades, we have made small incremental mistakes. We need to take bigger steps to improve the situation. However, if we try and do one big step, then the unintended consequences of that could be very much bigger, because it's all about the overall system. Going back to that global discussion, there's that story about that island where they had, a problem with one type of animal, which I can't remember, and they brought in, I think eventually they had rats. They brought in cats to fix the rats. The cats ruined the environment, then they had to cull the cats, and then this, that, and the other. It is a system. So if we do something big, then we might very much displace and unbalance the system. So we need a lot of small things that make the biggest impact as a small thing can do. And I think one of the biggest issues is that the organizations on a practical level, the organizations that can do that are all relatively small, relatively new, relatively unknown. And so for organizations such as local authorities, councils, businesses, and so on, they consider them to be a risk. And so they go back to what they know, which then means that we don't actually have any change. We go same old, same old. So if we can release that small barrier and allow all of these smaller organizations that are complex and are unknown, but we trust their expertise. If we start trusting people with their expertise a little bit more, rather than worry about the business risk or whatever, then we might actually get a bigger impact, and the kind of impact that we can see gradual and sustained improvement from.
In building kind of off both Alastair's and Mariana's kind of comments, as it strikes me in terms of the discussion we had in our panel, but over the event overall, is that we're kind of in the middle of a series of paradigm shifts that we're not too sure about. Kind of, one significant one is the moving from that one view of how do you deal with your economic realities while trying to meet your environmental aspirations. And we're now moving to a place, how do you deal with the environmental realities while trying to meet your economic aspirations? And that's a complex shift of thinking, which will take time to embed. And I think as well, just on an even more practical basis of the kind of institutions of how resources and money is actually kind of allocated. We're in this kind of paradigm shift where we need to begin moving from capital investment as being good to revenue investment being good. So we talked quite a bit about the need for management and maintenance as a fundamental part of the climate resilience strategy. And I think kind of Andy's comment about, do you spend lots of money building concrete flood defences in the water of Leith, in Leith, or do you get upstream into the kind of petlands and do land management interventions to actually mitigate against the upstream kind of effects to it? So inevitably, it's going to take a kind of a lot of time for institutions and systems to begin to kind of realign. But I thought that Mariana's comments was really quite interesting, is that there's lots of interesting grassroots thinking that's taking place at the moment. And that really is perhaps where the future will lie in the solutions.
I see that Leela's got her hand up. Are we allowed to draw our panelists in?
Yeah, come in, Leila, unmute yourself, please.
Sorry for jumping in. It's just something sort of that I didn't manage to say before. But to me, we've treated construction in our buildings very much like fast fashion. So if I'm trying to explain something to people now, like, think about fast fashion and all those, clothing that been advertised and we're buying, and then we're basically taking them to charity shops, or now we're trying to reuse the fabric. It's the same idea. Why don't we think the same about our buildings? And I'm not just talking about reusing old buildings, but I'm talking about like decades of this mindset of basically, oh yeah, you need to change your bathroom fittings every 10 years, or your windows, the UPVC ones, they don't last as long. So when you get the warranties for 5 years, all of that is exactly the same as fast fashion. Why wouldn't you spend a bit more money, if you can, obviously, and do something that's going to last longer? I speak to a lot of people on a daily basis who don't really realize that if you retrofit your own windows, your original timber windows with double glazing, and fix them, it's actually cheaper than getting new ones. We're just used to the idea of getting the ads, getting the quotes, and you get, for 4 or 6 UPVC windows, that's the price, So it's easier. I understand that it's easier for everyone. But we need to step back and think, is it better long term? And you might find actually that there are options which could be cheaper, better for the environment, better for your building, and longer lasting than what you thought originally. The other thing that there's a lot of other moving parts. For example, the EPCs that we get at the moment, the energy performance assessments, they're done in a very hasty way. That's not appropriate for traditional buildings. They don't really account for those mass masonry walls and those elements that you have in traditional buildings that actually they perform better than the energy performance certificate shows. There's a lot of things there, and I think people shouldn't despair. They just and what we are trying to do as well, and there's a lot of events actually next week and the week after during the space event that I saw that people have linked in. We're doing live tours on one of our projects, Hollywood Park Lodge, which we brought from EPC Band F to EPC Band C. Now, F actually is quite common for traditional buildings, especially ones that are detached. And you know, not everyone will manage to get the building to Band C, obviously, because it's also about money and managing this. But we are really trying to show people how they can do small steps to bring those improvements to get to that standard. And there's a lot of other good comments about basically those district heating schemes. And obviously, if you're off the gas grid outside of Edinburgh, it's not, you know, it's not the same. But that's a separate discussion. I just wanted to flag some things up. And if you do have time, go and look at our website, which is a bit of a mess. There's a lot of publications. We have blogs. We've done so much on energy efficiency, and we've even reviewed our own projects in a paper called Technical Paper 24 that I can link to show how different materials have performed. And last but not least, there was a comment out there that wasn't fully answered, and I just caught like a while ago, and it was about basically barriers in local government on installation, which is not, I just wanted to point out that that's not exactly it. The truth is a bit more nuanced than that. But I think a lot of what we're trying to actually educate people about is that a lot of changes that are easy and they're out there, they're actually not appropriate for your building. And if you knew what that means, you actually wouldn't choose them. You have no idea how many people, again, we have who've put like Kingspan foil back installation, and they call us and they're like, oh, you know, my wall is moldy. And that was only done like 5 years ago. So it's about educating people mostly to make the right choices. And I'm going to shut up.
Well, just picking up on some of those points, though, what is the role, and it's really to the panelists, what is the role for regulation in this? I mean, yes, community, individual actions, and yes, overall, you know, aspirations and targets. But I'm just thinking about the whole issue about, you know, reusing existing buildings, which everybody, I think, is signing up to it. You know, it seems not controversial that in principle, it's better to reuse the building if you can, rather than demolish and build a new. We know that the VAT regulations mitigate against that. But also, what about the new local plan? I think there is in the city development plan something around reuse of buildings, but it's caveated. Terry, do you want to?
Yeah, it's just worth joining up. Is I'm not too sure whether I'd agree with your assertion that everybody thinks reusing existing buildings is a good thing. I attended a meeting earlier in the kind of week which proposed the demolition of a building that wasn't even 25 years old and its replacement. And I think that there's a much bigger issue around land economics and development economics that we haven't even kind of touched on, but I'll come back to that. But there is a kind of an emerging policy in the draft or the final written statements local plan, which talks about embodied carbon within existing structures and how that should be considered as part of the planning process. But the policy then immediately caveats it by saying that if a developer can prove that he can get more floor space or more housing on a site, then he can ignore the carbon assessment that's required to be undertaken. And I don't know of any property developer in Edinburgh who wouldn't be able to kind of argue for more floor space or more housing, you know, going forward. So we're still in a in a genesis phase for some of the changes to the policy regime for covering some of these kind of aspects. And so much of the carbon thinking in terms of at least buildings, and Alastair and Mariana will know this far better than I do, concentrates on the operational carbon management and not the embedded or embodied carbon kind of element to it. That covers Leela's point about how the EPCs kind of work, not quite understanding that kind of issue of thermal mass and dynamics of existing structures. So that in itself is a conference in its own right.
Can I add to Leela's comment and to yours about, especially about the existing buildings aspect? And I want to go back to, and Alastair, I'm sure that you'll agree, I want to go back to Frank Duffy's model of sort of shell, services, scenery and sets, right? And the layers. And it's important sometimes to remember and also to sort of provide guidance. So I don't know about regulation, but certainly more clarity, and to explain and to say and to set these and say, look, see the site, that's supposed to stay there for millennia unless we do something silly like flood it because we haven't mitigated climate change and adapted. See the building. If you put a building and you put it on and it's only 30 years, or you're managing your life cycle costs of it for 30 years, then you're doing something wrong. We want you to look at it for 300 years, and that's how long we want buildings to last. And the 25-year building you're talking about, Terry, that clearly might have been also badly designed to begin with, because that wasn't in its making. And so it's crumbling. I've seen some of those buildings and it's heartbreaking. And then you explain to people, you know, the skin, the outer layer, that's change. And that's part of your maintenance. Everybody takes on a building. When I say everybody, I mean corporations and so on. They take on a building and they think, oh, there's no maintenance to be done. We don't have to think about it. Yes, you do. You know, it's like a car. After your first 3 years, you've got to at least MOT it. The same with a building. You have to maintain it. And those maintenance aspects need to be clear, because otherwise you do come to 50 or 60 years down the line and no one has maintained the building. Everything's crumbling and you're thinking, oh, it's going to be cheaper for me to change it. So I think that's where some of these guidance and almost policies should focus going forward. And especially if you have existing buildings where their skin and their structure is fine, then you can talk about how to keep them up by taking those layers. That's me, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, one area we've not touched upon much is business. I mean, Edinburgh is a very rich city compared with many places in the world, many places in UK. We've got leading companies in things like fintech in the city, strong legal, research, educational capacity in the city. And I think the conversation today has shown, you know, quite a formidable array of professional talent in the city. How do we actually mobilize the contribution from business into this so that they can make their contribution? Maybe they're already making it, but are people aware of that? Are there good things we should be looking at, or are there guides we should be pushing out there?
It's a very broad question. That, I mean, obviously working in development as I have and do, I'm aware of how restrictive the developer will feel policy is, and how many developers, I think now at the moment, they are beginning to see a real opportunity to draw in the things which are, I hate to use the word populist, but that's not the right word, prevalent. Climate change, the effects of that and so forth, and the way that we live, the way that we want to live, and beginning to adapt and change buildings. For example, the density change in places like Glasgow, where I think not so long ago you had maybe 15 to 20% occupancy for residents in the city centre, which is entirely the opposite to Edinburgh. We don't all live in the middle, but it's a populous place, the middle, the centre. And that policy in Glasgow is beginning to push towards an acceptance of density, and that developers are, of course, seeing a good opportunity here, but having discussed this with a few of them, also absolutely nailing their colours to the mast by working with, what shall we say, new asset classes, and by that I mean new financial models, with things like build to rent, which essentially means if a developer builds a house and he sells it, he no longer has any control of it. It's up to the homeowner who do what they like. They can burn it down, they can paint it blue, whatever, right? But with build to rent, the investment is long term. And yes, it may be sold in 20 to 30 years' time, but we're already talking about buildings being knocked down in 20 years' time. What you've actually got now is developers holding assets for 20 to 30 years. So the maintenance of this and the upkeep, so to speak, will be inherent. It absolutely has to stay. It has to be part of the building. So this is, I think, a bit of a mind shift in development. It's the beginning of something, I hope. And of course, well, I think that's really all I'm trying to say, is that there are new ideas about how people live that are appropriate in some places. The BTR stuff in Edinburgh is a bit more peripheral. In Glasgow, it's on the high street, literally. And I think that if we view it positively, and not just as an expansive of density and agreed from a developer, which I don't think is the case, it's an opportunity for developers to answer lots of the things that we, as people and thinkers, are keen to deal with, grapple with, I mean.
Just on the build to rent, Alastair, I've moved to Haymarket, and right next to me over there is the Moda Living people. And they're building these massive structures. They look swanky enough. And I'm glad to say that I haven't seen them put up insulation while it was raining. So, they know what they're doing almost. But then I went onto their website, and for a 1-bedroom apartment, they're asking for rent upwards of £1,500 a month. So it is a good start, but I fear that it is a good start for a very particular, sort of type of social.
I think that policy, I don't disagree with you, but policy will also drive that. And for example, the one in Glasgow that I was thinking about is middle market rent. Now, what is middle market rent? It's not housing association, it's somewhere in the middle. We're veering into somewhere different now, but I'm not necessarily a believer in the market will out, and I don't disagree, but I think it's a good start. And I think there's a change in the thinking in the people that I deal with in my architect life, and that I'm not suggesting we should be less cynical, God forbid, but I think that we should be more open, definitely, or grow to be open. They're part of the solution now. I see Stuart's got his hand up. He's going to contradict everything I just said.
I'm not. I'm going to agree. I think it is about the financial models, and I think we all need to be a bit more aware of what those models are. And I think with retrofit, we need a model that works for the developers. At the end of the day, they'll do it if it makes monetary sense. There's also a little bit something about land reform, especially in places like Edinburgh where land's so expensive. If you put any bells and whistles on like a solar panel or something like that, it can blow the financial models. So what you essentially do as a developer will just sit on the land until it gets a little bit, until they can sell the property for a little bit more, then they can afford to put the solar panel on. That's kind of our model at the moment, and we need to get a bit more sophisticated at that. I'm not an expert in this, but we do have expertise in the city about financial models, and I think that is something we just need to do. If you look at onshore renewable energy, there was a model created, whether you like it or not, it's worked, We've got massive amounts of onshore renewable energy because there was an incentive scheme, and the development industry came in there, and to a certain extent communities. And I think that was where we missed the trick. We didn't do enough for communities at the start of that. So that's what we should learn there. But yeah, let's get the financial models. These type of conferences don't talk about it. So we maybe need to bring in some of these financial people to explain it to us and how it might work.
Yes, and if I can kind of add to Stuart's comment on that as well, is I had the pleasure of with the Paris COP of meeting with the UK negotiating team in a small NGO stakeholder group, and it was very surprising to hear that the UK's negotiating team had not engaged with either the construction sector or the banking or the financial or insurance sectors about the implications of what they did for climate change and climate mitigation. So we on the big macro scale, there are these holes in kind of thinking, and Stuart's probably quite right, is within the kind of city, there's probably enough brains of people who understand, you know, how the markets work, that they could make some really kind of useful, thoughtful kind of additions to the discussion on how you begin shifting, you know, from one economic to another economic model.
So that's maybe the follow-up action for the Cockburn, to try and bring some of these people together with that kind of agenda and see where we get to. It would be interesting, because I'm not aware of that discussion going on at the moment, but it seems quite fundamental to a situation where you can kind of, you know, go with the stream rather than go against the stream in terms of making progress. Can I maybe pick up another thing on that, which is really going back a little bit to Maureen, but a theme that's been running through the day, which is the kind of local government role in it, and the silos that still exist, the extent to which we've got a zero carbon strategy, but we've got lots of strategies, and when push comes to shove, one can be balanced against another and decision taken by an officer. Do we see ways in which the culture of local government has been changed to one that's become more risk averse and less willing to trust the community groups out there, which was it Howard was arguing for? And do we see ways in which that can be turned around from bottom up, and from the nature of this emergency, and from civic society efforts? Not an easy question.
I guess it came out from a theme from the first session that Mariana was chairing, is, you know, perhaps we need to have a different resource support model for local authorities in Scotland or the UK, because increasingly they are being expected to do so much, but with so little resource coming to them, that it must be an almost impossible way to kind of think your way through it. I see Maureen's put her hand up.
Maureen's coming to the rescue of the panelists on this one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I see a huge change actually, certainly in the City of Edinburgh Council over the last number of years and decades. I see less silo mentality. You know, an individual instance, there will be silos, there's no question about it. There's certainly a feeling amongst senior management that's a lot more collegiate than it used to be. And there's a lot more, I think, trust of local community groups. They have to show their mettle, and it's certainly when I talked about Portobello and Central, they were challenged to really show what they were made of, and they stepped up. So I think once that trust is built, and I see it in Friends of Parks, I see it in the ability of senior managers to say, yeah, you can have this resource, that resource, and we'll give you some litter pickers or whatever to do what you need to do. A lot more than there was 25 years ago. So it's changing. And to a degree that comes from the top.
Thank you.
I think I agree to some of Maureen's points, in that we are being treated a little bit more like adults than we used to be a few years, many years ago, especially when it comes to these sort of opinions, and a little bit less like adults in other ones. But I think there might be some shift in local authorities. And I think it has to do also with the shift that is happening in businesses as well, because although they're separate, they are connected in many ways. And I feel that businesses are a little less siloed, and so councils become a little less siloed too. But I think, you know, community business corporates move a little bit quicker than councils do, and it probably needs to be a little bit more stepped up in that respect.
Yeah, I wonder a little bit if you're playing the old man in this, if some of the directions in which local government was intended to head after the reorganisation 1975 have still got resonance. I mean, one of the things that we had then, of course, was regional councils, and we've heard from particularly Andrew, the need to really look beyond the local authority boundary to get solutions to some problems. And some of the issues around levelling up and access to 20-minute neighbourhoods also relate to travel patterns across much wider than just the city. Another key theme in the 70s was that we had to find a way to save the older housing stock. And the solution was basically a system of government grants, quite generous government grants to homeowners, but also the formation of community-based housing associations, which made a massive impact. It may be difficult for people now to realise just, how strong the dynamic of comprehensive clearance and rebuilding was. To actually, that was turned around within a matter of 2 or 3 years in the end. But it crucially was the grant system and a legal mechanism with housing action areas and the community housing associations. And a third key trend, which has been touched on indirectly by reference to what happened in Craig Miller, was a recognition of the strength of community inputs, but also, again, the need for some funding and support mechanisms to those, that you couldn't just expect people to keep going and drive themselves into the ground. So I wonder, to challenge people, do we need to go back to the future in some of these things and think again about a regional scale of action, about an incentive-driven, highly focused campaign on neighbourhood and property improvement, and about much better resourcing to community workers, community development work, and community engagement.
And that's perhaps just a good place to kind of pause upon as we've kind of crossed our kind of deadline for this kind of final session by 5 minutes. But without wanting to be the axe that goes, is perhaps there's final thoughts from either Alastair or Mariana.
Oh, me, okay. I think my final thought is that I think we're definitely moving in the right direction, but perhaps not as fast as we would like to see. And I think that we can push a little bit harder, and we have the tools, we have the expertise, as we've said, within the city to do that, and to bring it all together through all of the organizations that we can have access to.
Alastair, looks like you might get the last word.
Yeah, I would like to add to that I think we need to work with those that we've often found in the past we've worked against, because times are changing and we need to change with it. Well, we are already, I believe. But keeping up to date with the changing built environment around us and how the construct of it is changing rapidly, I think is essential. So that's the subject for the next conference.
Okay. Well, thanks very much to all three of you. I'll hand back to Terry. I'm sorry I let it overrun. Terry, do you want to just do the wrap up and remind people to donate and join the Cockburn and that sort of thing?
Thank you very much, Cliff. I don't think I need to kind of do that final bit because you've just done it so well. If you wish to continue putting your kind of thoughts out on social media of this, do remember to kind of tag us at the Cockburn or hashtag COP26 conversations. I think the final task falls to me is just to thank all of the kind of panelists who've given up kind of hugely of their kind of time and their kind of expertise to share their thoughts about BioLeaves, We Live, seeding grassroots climate strategies in Edinburgh. It's not going to be an easy kind of task, but certainly the fact that we're all talking and sharing ideas makes it a much more palatable task to kind of achieve going forward. So we've been recording this kind of live on Facebook, and we'll hopefully be putting up the whole thing on YouTube. So keep an eye out for that, and do continue sharing kind of your ideas kind of with us. If you have any kind of thoughts, post this, email them to us. We'd like to kind of hear from you. But I think it just falls to me to say again, thank you kind of very much for everybody for participating, and for the support from Museums Gallery Scotland to help make this happen. Thank you.